and welcome to episode 3 of Conversations with the Blank Experiment. We are happy to be joined with Brandon Sweeney, and we will be talking about his piece off of our album, Safe Passage. So thank you for being here with us.
Me? Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah. No, happy to be here. It's cool. Cool that we're doing the conversations. Always fun to talk to you guys, and it's going to be fun talking about the piece.
Yeah, so how about we start off by just talking about how you met us in our ensemble?
Right. Well, I actually met most of the ensemble through you, of course, Drew. You actually were part of the first official piece I ever wrote back in like summer 2016. We were doing a consortium for saxophone and marimba, a piece called Finding Oasis. Bradley Shillett was organizing it, and he got me in touch with you and a couple of other people like Andrew and a couple other saxophonists. And that's how we met originally. You were really great to meet and work with on that piece. It was all mostly over Facebook back in those days, and you know, you gave the piece of performance, I think, in Michigan. We were all in our undergrads back then. That was a...
I have not been able to perform the piece yet, sadly. I'm trying to find a percussionist. It's like on my to-do list in grad school because saxophone percussion is a very nice instrumentation.
No, yeah, and that piece is a commitment from the marimbist, especially with like the alternating time signature, you know, the 10/8 and 7/8 permutations. So that makes sense. But we met through that, and you were really cool, and then you were putting together the experiment, and I saw all the stuff online, and I think this was right when I was transitioning to my master's at UF, and so I hit you guys up on Facebook, sent you a message, and said, were you looking to do a piece? And thankfully you guys were super cool, and you were like, yeah, we'd like to do something, and I think you were one of my second or third collaboration pieces to do, and definitely like one of my second or third commissions I've ever had, so... it was super cool, and it was super cool to get to write for a group of talented musicians, and you know, it's such a interesting instrumentation, and just the whole brand of the ensemble, like the Blank Experiment, and that kind of freedom to do some different things, some things that are less conventional for me, or some things that felt less safe as a composer. Really gave me some good space to kind of branch out and try some stuff. So I was really grateful for that, and really grateful to have the piece be on the album as well.
You could say it was a less safe passage.
Yeah, exactly. There it is. That's what we're going for here.
Yes, we're going for bad puns. Yes, we're going for bad puns. That's exactly what we're going for. But no, and I think it's so fascinating how many of our collaborations actually came through Facebook. Like, we have not met in person yet, but we've collaborated on the consortium, and we collaborate on this piece because actually Michelle and I made all the social medias at one point. We were just sitting there making everything, and what was it? Within 24 hours, we had 5 or 6 composers message us, just saying like, "Do you have music? Do you want music?"
Yep. This was in Florida too, at your dad's place too.
Yes, yeah. We were in Florida at the time actually, and because prior to our first like batch of pieces, saxophone, clarinet, and harp had 0 pieces written for it. So you were one of the first ones to write for us. So what do you think it was like writing for an instrumentation that didn't have like a standard piece to look at, didn't have any other pieces to go off of? You really had freedom to do whatever. How was that?
Right. Well, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because when you look for, if I'm going to write a new piece for string quartet, there's the pro of that is that there's so many other, you know, standards or, you know, landmark, benchmark pieces that have been written that really illustrate what that kind of, you know, sonic environment is, what that kind of ensemble can do, what kind of music they can make. The con then being that there are so many amazing pieces already written for it that, you know, there's this precedent set, and there's this, you know, standard that you kind of feel held to when you're writing the piece of like, is this as good as like what everyone else has already done with it? And so, you know, the Blank Experiment and these smaller chamber, you know, non-traditional ensemble setups with different instrumentations, there is nothing previously done for them. And so there's not that baggage of, I have to write something that's going to be compared to, you know, the Bartok string quartets, or something that's going to be compared to the Beethoven string quartets, or even just like more recently, Carolina Shaw put out a whole album of string quartet music that is within the modern aesthetic and sounds really, really cutting edge. And so everyone's listening to that now and going, how am I going to write something that fits in the same space as that? And so it's nice to have an ensemble like this where it's not carrying that. And the challenge then becomes, well, how do you write for something that you don't have any reference of hearing music for before? And I imagine people do some kind of similar stuff to what I did, which is listen to solo clarinet work, solo sax work, and solo harp work, or listen to pieces with harp accompanying other wind instruments and try and find a good balance and really just kind of get into the uniqueness of what each of the instruments can do. But the ground to be made up is still those collaborative textures, because we can have a piece where all three instruments are playing their own thing, and that's still just kind of like three solo pieces happening at the same time. So writing a truly collaborative work is the challenge, and it's exciting and fun to try and find those individual flavors, but also find how those individual flavors can combine for the different instruments.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider your piece to be kind of one of, like, in the first batch of commissions we had, because we kind of, all the pieces we commissioned kind of came in, like, these little groups all set before a concert. And yours was one of the first, 4 or 5 that we ended up commissioning. So, and it's just crazy to me how all the different composers took our instrumentation in such wildly different ways. Like, I remember specifically with your piece, you had, like, the aleatoric figures on the first page of it, and that was just, that it created this texture of having the key clicks in the saxophone and the clarinet of something that no other composer really tried to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it, too, is, like, I tend to think of things in terms of Venn diagrams with the instruments sometimes. So you have the area of the Venn diagram where it's just what the clarinet can do. And then you have the other circle has the area where it's just what the sax can do. And you start looking for all the crossover areas, or what are textures that I can create on the same instruments in the same ensemble that then they can do like call and response with, or do unison lines with, or create the same sounds. The harp was by far the most challenging thing to get right and to try and, incorporate into the piece organically. But both because I didn't have a lot of exposure with harp, I'd still say I don't have a ton of exposure of harp as a really like a powerful voice in the ensemble, not as much as a texture. And so trying to find harp lit where it's more, melodic and more like an actual like soloistic instrument, and then also finding ways to incorporate that with the 2 wind textures was the most intimidating, I'd say, part of writing for the group.
Yeah, I know for a lot of composers, writing for harp was very, very different. Like, new harp music is something that a lot of our composers didn't have experience with beforehand, and especially just given the mechanisms of a harp, it can be challenging to write for.
Yeah, you do a lot of research on pedaling and how to give pedal notes. And, you find all these interesting things like palm harmonics and different things. But yeah, it's, the big worry is, if I'm going to write for the harp, am I just going to write like it's a piano, and you can't do that? And also, if I'm going to write for the harp, am I just writing it as a background instrument? And if I'm doing that, kind of what's the point? Because it's we have a fully capable musician there that's being underutilized if all we're writing is just, background sounds. And I tried to walk the line between having to do that sometimes and trying to make sure it was more of a melodic, prominent voice in the piece.
So now, going into the piece that you wrote for us a little bit, you had different instruments to choose from some of us. Like Michelle, you had the option of either doing B-flat clarinet, bass clarinet. With me, you had either soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, saxophone. Why did you end up going with B-flat clarinet and soprano saxophone?
I wanted to keep the lower sounds of the harp the thing that's going to separate it, because we had I had the options for the saxophone, but I didn't really want it to go bottom wind, I didn't want to go bottom wind and then upper wind with an upper clarinet, and I didn't want to go 2 bass instruments because I thought at that point it's just a little too muddy. If we had a bari sax and a bass clarinet, that would be fun. That'd be definitely fun as a duet. Mark Mellitz has a great duet arrangement. I think of one of his pieces called Black for bari sax and bass clarinet.
There's a couple good ones for that instrumentation.
Yeah, it just wasn't what I was leaning towards. When I came up with the idea of the piece, I was envisioning these kind of different gestures that would go along with it, and they were all kind of like these gestures of like shaking and like
Mm-hmm.
quivering and shivering. Really, shivering was a big word I had for the whole piece because the piece at the time it was a chance for me to really like branch out and do music that was just going to be uncomfortable for long
Mm-hmm.
passages of time, which isn't something that people usually like to do. I
You
was
could say
certainly
you were able to experiment.
yeah, I was there we go again, man.
I'm on a roll today.
You are 2 for 2 at least. Yeah, it was a chance to experiment with that kind of, music that doesn't really resolve, music that doesn't really lend itself to easy listening, music that doesn't really seem like it ever, reaches that place of, safe harbor or actually in a safe passage. The programmatic nature of the piece this is when I was writing and I was younger. I felt a lot younger. This is only like 3 years ago, but I felt a lot younger as a composer.
I
And
understand completely.
I felt the need to get a programmatic element of that into the music. And I was thinking about like, someone being uh, on a journey not by choice, like a refugee, and having to get from where they are to a new place, but they don't know where they're going. So it's the whole point of like having to leave somewhere safe and go somewhere, but you actually don't have a destination for you. You don't have a destination in mind, so you don't know that you're going to get there at any point. And what would that journey kind of feel like if you were having to go somewhere and you didn't even know where you were going, you didn't know if you were going to make it. And so a lot of the gestures that came out of that concept, I then tried to translate into musical gestures on the instrument. And so for me, getting that high tingy end of the upper strings of the harp and the higher instruments in the winds, the higher sax and the higher clarinet, lent themselves more to cold and shivering and quaking. We have the key clicks and all these different gestures that are meant to be like trembling gestures, um, along with these dissonant harmonies. Where if I went with bari sax and bass clarinet, they always just sound so warm.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard bass clarinet sound like super like homey and like I want to wrap myself up in that warm bass clarinet and that warm bari sax sound, and it just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that I felt really spoke to the piece as well as the higher wind voices did.
Yeah, because out of everything we ended up commissioning for that trio instrumentation, you were the only person to utilize both of the high instruments. So I think it sounds so much different than not only everything on the album, but just everything we ended up commissioning in general. Like I think it really is able to stand out for that reason in a very good way. So you told us a little bit about the programmatic elements of the piece. Is there anything you can tell us about the compositional aspects of it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was studying with, it was my first semester at UF, and my teacher was, he's now retired, Paul Kuntz. He was a big name from a couple of years back in the electronic composition world. He
Mm-hmm.
does like his own version of C sound where he codes all the sounds in the computer himself, but it's his own code language. And he's just crazy, crazy genius guy, but was very different aesthetically from where I was at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
there was kind of this gap in between us, and I think it made me much better because I had to study with him and really find that middle ground. But he really introduced me for the first time into the ideas of like set theory and using sets as a compositional aspect. So what I tried to do was come up with different permutations of a set of notes and how they could work together. And the end result is still fairly consonant, but it's not necessarily in a strict horizontal harmonic language or traditional tonal harmony language. It's more just sets of sound that I found interesting in service of the piece that I then structured horizontally. And they don't necessarily progress from one set to the other in traditional terms of like voice leading harmony. So there isn't
Mm-hmm.
like a set that would fit within a certain chord that would then move to another chord, and you would hear the motion horizontally with good voice leading. It's more just these independent columns of sound
Mm-hmm.
that just kind of happen over time. And again, felt it worked pretty well with the piece where, there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to the events. It's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
uh, things are happening over time and they don't seem to be following in any kind of structural progression of this happened because this happened because this happened. And so using the individual columns of sound then made sense. And it was a good way to experiment with that kind of recontextualization of, pitch and how to organize pitch and space. So.
Yeah, so...
Oh, I was about to ask, how, as a composer, how not having that kind of playbook with our instrumentation, how was it powerful as a composer to be like, I can, set a new path, or was it intimidating, or like a mixture?
I think it's definitely always a mixture. I've always found it very liberating. It's much more, again, the more intimidating for me is definitely the standardized ensembles, and then looking at everything that's come before. And we're not supposed to be comparative all the time in like what I write versus what other people have written for the instruments, but there's so many great works out there for something like I've already said string quartet, so we'll go symphony. I know a couple of people right now that are writing full-on symphonies, and to write a symphony is a major, major challenge. That would be like writing, because it's a set instrumentation everybody knows, which means that there's the opportunity for it to get played a lot, but it also means that there's a lot of great music for it already. And so, as someone that really likes the new part of new music and how it's really of its time, I also like how these ensembles are very much of their time. The Blank Experiment is an ensemble of the 2000s. It's not an ensemble of any other century. What you're doing really is the cutting edge of music, because you're taking an ensemble. I mean, at the time, I don't even think when you guys were formed, you were all at the same school, which is just mind-blowing. And you're working with composers that are in different time zones to create pieces. So, to me, it's really of the zeitgeist to write for these kind of pieces, and write pieces for these kind of ensembles that exist in a time when we have the communication and the technology to make it happen. It's really special, and it's really cool, and it feels genuine. So, for me, it's always exciting to get to write for those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the early ages of the ensemble, and even now, we're all located in very different areas. Like, right from the beginning of our ensemble, both Michelle and Natalie were at Michigan State, and I was at Bowling Green, so
right.
We were a few-hour drive away, so we would really only get to rehearse. We would get to rehearse very little.
Yeah, we had to make it was just kind of like that professional performance schedule. Like, okay, we really have to make sure we practice our parts individually, so that together, like, we get these 1 or 2 rehearsals before performance to just really finesse out the music. Yeah,
because we were all undergraduates at the time, like, and even like at the very beginning of our instrumentation, I was a sophomore, so it was what I was used to in collegiate ensembles was, all right, you have to rehearse 3 hours a week, and you get 1 coaching with a professor every week. And
I remember Drew being gone for like a whole weekend from our reed quintet at the time. We would have our regular, like our 3-hour rehearsals, and he'd be like, all right, guys, I got to be gone for a whole weekend so I can go up to Michigan State for my other ensemble. Yeah. And then now here we are, and we're in our separated one.
I think we're all in each one of us is in a different state.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of nuts too when you think about all the ensembles right now that are recording remotely. The amount of remote work you guys have to do to pull this off is really incredible, and it's really only something that could happen, in this kind of time period, this timeline. Hopefully, it's not the darkest timeline, but we're in the timeline we're in, and
the current dark ages, I guess.
Well, even like rehearsing pieces with the composer. I remember when you guys were getting ready to record the album. And this might have been after the premiere of the piece, because I remember getting a recording of the premiere of the piece. And the one time that I sat in on a rehearsal with you guys was via Skype, and I was on tour with a drum corps as part of their teaching staff, and I was in some Boy Scout camp in Indiana that had a Wi-Fi connection, and I was on the computer with you guys, and you were rehearsing in Michigan. That's the only time that I think we ever actually everyone involved in the creation of the collaborative music was actually in the same, even virtual space, which is kind of nuts. But it's created interesting results, and it's definitely something that, you know, given all the miniatures that have happened in quarantine and all these collaborations that are happening because people can't meet in person and we can't have live music, it's definitely something I felt more experienced with when the time came that, you know, people were asking for, you know, calls for miniatures and calls for 1 minute pieces and different things like that. And I'm sure you guys, as, you know, musician performers too, you were ready for that kind of thing in a sense that other people weren't, if it was their first time having to, you know, make music with people they've never met in person before.
Previous to working with us, had you had a recording experience to any of your pieces?
I think Aaron Campbell put a piece I wrote for him called Paris After Dark on his album. But he had it done in the studio, and he really, like, I had been there for the premiere, and he lived in Tampa, so we'd worked a lot. I hadn't been there to, like, be part of the recording process, but I had worked with him very closely on the piece from, like, the moment he commissioned it to the moment he premiered it. So he already knew the ins and outs of how it was going to go and, you know, what to do with it and how to take it to that next level, which is always the best thing about live performers, is when you take the music and you just elevate it past what, you know, the composers can ever dream of. And so he already had that experience. But yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the second piece of mine that's ever been recorded on any kind of distribution platform. So it was really, really special. I was really excited when I got the message from Drew that you guys were making an album. I was like, yes.
Fun fact, that was actually the plan from day one. We met in a Starbucks. We were sitting down, and I'm pretty sure Michelle was like, all right, in a year, I want to record an album.
Nice.
So
that was it.
Yeah, that had always been one of our driving forces, and yeah.
I mean, that's great. I mean, we gotta get more albums. It's not like we don't have time on our hands now.
Ain't that the truth?
So what's your future plan then, Brendan? Do you have anything going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I recently, I'm very fortunate, and I recently got a call from, I've been working the past year as a freelance musician in Tampa, Florida, and, you know, that became a little bit more difficult around March, but I recently got a phone call from my old teacher at UF that they had a sudden vacancy in their graduate assistantships and in their PhD program, and he offered me a fellowship to come back and get a doctorate at UF. So it looks like virtually for the first year, but I will be returning to the University of Florida tomorrow, actually, to start studying and playing trumpet and, you know, teaching oral theory and written theory as a graduate assistant. And writing-wise, I've got a commission right now from a trumpet player named Ben Elgin for trumpet and guitar pedals we've been working on, and another trumpet player named Eli Deneke is currently a doctoral student at FSU, and we're working on a brass quintet. And those projects are actually almost not at completion, but the two projects I'm really focusing on for the next year is a trumpet concerto, again for Ben Elgin and him and Eli. They were both in the studio with me as trumpet players in the master's program at UF, and they've kind of gone off and started doctorates elsewhere. And we kind of decided, kind of similar to us just hanging out in Starbucks, we decided getting beers one day that we should write a trumpet concerto. So I'll be writing that for probably the foreseeable future and spending a good bit of time on it.
Well, it's like a good project.
Yes, yeah. Congratulations on UF. I'm sure you will have a great time there.
Thanks. I'm really, really lucky. But I see a lot of people right now going back to school. Mm-hmm. I'm just really happy that the opportunity opened up. I think I probably would have gone back to school. I would have liked another few more years just kind of doing the freelance thing and, you know, making some things just entirely on my own. But the world we're in today is the world we're in today, so you got to be adaptable, and I'm excited to go back and start learning again and writing some music for people.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to tell us, or anything else anybody would like to ask? Nothing? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. It was great getting to chat with you about our collaboration, and best of luck at UF and with your future projects. Those all sound very exciting. If you want to hear people want to find out more about you, where can we find you?
For sure. I mean, thanks for having me, guys. This has been fun. If you want to look me up online, you can find me. I have a website, brendansweeneymusic.com. Just did a major, what's the word, refurbishment or, overhaul or, some synonym of I redid it, my website. And it's brendansweeneymusic.com, and it's got, listings of a couple of my pieces and some contact info. I'm not very active on Facebook anymore, but you can find me on Instagram if you want to follow me at bsweeney.muse. And I usually post pictures there of like the different projects or different things I'm working on. And you can email me at brendansweeneymusic@gmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you again. And if you want to hear his piece, you can hear his piece, Safe Passage, on our debut album, Conversations, or we will be playing it for you right now. So we hope you enjoy, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.